Gee, hey Des, good morning.
Good morning, Regina.
So what were you up to last night?
I did some homework and then I watched Dancing with the Stars.
OMG, slay. I love Dancing with the Stars. I heard that the last Bachelorette is on this season and I don't like her too much, but everyone's like raving about her. It's whatever.
I hold some resentment towards the show. I don't like the host.
Oh, yeah, Tyra Banks, right? Like, I liked her in her old show when she did all that, but I don't care what she has to say anymore. Like, girl, nobody cares.
I agree. Last season.
Yeah. Literally, though.
There is a visible difference between these two individuals having a conversation. For one, they both react to the conversation in their own way, whether that be in their language, motions, or facial expressions.
While one chooses to be more expressive, the other is more reserved and held back. But don't we all have these two traits within us?
The part of you that may become excited when the topic you're passionate about comes up in conversation,
And the part of you that becomes shy when meeting new people.
Everyone has their own way of expressing themselves with speech in different contexts, and as future educators, we should learn how to promote the student's individuality.
Of course, there are guidelines to stay appropriate in the classroom, but to try and diminish a student based on their discourse shows the student that they should be ashamed of a vital part of who they are.
Instead, by allowing places for student expression in the curriculum, students can reinforce their sense of self while hopefully learning about themselves along the way. In the classroom, students may encounter clashes between their ways of speaking and appropriateness in at least two ways. For one, it can put limits on formality, slang, and elements of self-expression.
This can also limit their usage of home discourses, a language they already feel comfortable using. By encouraging different types of vernaculars, students may feel more inclined to participate in your classroom.
The effects of this can be seen in Chapter 5 of Linguistic Justice, titled Black Linguistics Consciousness. Dr. Baker Bell shared a segment of group dialogue when asked the question, "Did your feelings change or remain the same when comparing language A, Black language, to language B, Standard English?" Here's some of the students' reaction from Baker Bell's class when asked this question.
A boy named Janelle. My feelings did change because I did not know that slang or Ebonics was even a language or that it had a history and roots. The most valuable thing I learned from the study is that the language I use daily is not wrong or incorrect. The language I use is a real language. Alistar says, I think when I first started, I thought only one language was better than the other, but they are both languages people communicate in, and I should not stereotype. And if Fetty Brave says, I said the same thing. Your appearance shouldn't portray the way you speak, and I should not judge someone's voice.
What would the benefit of trying to make a casual conversation elements away from the students? A large part of schooling experience comes from the bonding and communication exercises students participate in with their peers. We as educators need not to realize that the way we speak in a modern world will not change.
There are ways that we can have them grow, but we cannot clip the wings of a student as they must develop their individuality on their own. That is why we must train ourselves to reflect on our actions and grow ourselves as teachers. In this last portion of the same chapter, Baker Bell ends by giving her readers a way of forward thinking by creating this list. Baker Bell says that educators should have a language to name their unique experiences with linguistic racism, critical capacities to question and interrogate linguistic oppression, African American epistemologies that allow them to view Black language, literacy, and identity in complex and sophisticated ways, space to critically reflect and interrupt their own internalized anti-Black linguistic racism, and most importantly, a language education that affirms and values their racial and linguistic backgrounds and experiences, which is invaluable for their sense of self and identity. Just as there are ways to acknowledge the expression of speech with your students, it can also be applied to the same with your dialogue while conducting class.
This can go towards creating a healthy classroom environment while modeling the confidence you want your students to take on.
In this clip from the new sitcom series Abbott Elementary, you can see two types of discourse being displayed between these coworkers.
We've been taking appetizer money and giving these kids a charcuterie experience. Don't give us the money because we need it. Give it to us because everyone at Abbott deserves it.
Well, thank you, Principal Coleman. That was a very passionate plea.
Well, okay, sis. I did that. Guess what?
Okay, what's happening?
I mean, good job, Eva. Thank you, subordinate. So,
This goes to show that your students can have different attitudes towards learning based on how you present yourself.
Being able to relate to the students and make class fun for them is an unseen part of the teaching job.
This again contributes to the overall environment of the classroom your students are projected to learn in.
In the Discoveries by James Gee, language is compared to something of an identity kit that an individual takes on. Gee writes, a discourse is sort of an identity kit which comes complete with the appropriate costume and instructions on how to act, talk, and often write so as to take on a particular role that others soon will recognize. We all have many discourses. He also goes on to say that being trained as a linguist meant that he had to learn to speak and think like a linguist, and others sometimes need to fill in that role as well. Here's a quote by him on the screen that talks more about this.
Gee also writes, but how does one acquire a discourse? It turns out that much is claimed controversially to be true of second language acquisition or socially situated cognition, end quote. Whether it be through certain catchphrases or dialect that students take on, or a certain language usage gained from pop culture, students are evolving and shaping their personality.
To put a pause on that stops their chance for personal growth. Certain ways to promote this expression through speech can be through an open class discussion about students' life outside of the class. What did you do this weekend? To how did your game go? Extends a casual line of communication that shows the students you care and want to learn about them. There are also opportunities for students to create something to bring to the classroom. An activity like a student-created game or student-led discussion can be effective for promoting purposeful dialogue. By giving students a variety of learning experiences, they can converse with their peers while encouraging curiosity and critical thinking. When applied to expression and writing, students can be tasked with keeping annotation journals that are a place for them to write their reactions and connection to a certain assigned reading. By also assigning an assignment like a personal narrative, students can combine the grammar and structure of a genre. They can write about something they have a first-hand account of.
Nancy Hornberger and Sandra Lee from the textbook titled Social Linguistics and Language Education says, drawing on these notions of language, discourse, and identity, language educators and researchers have the primary goal of examining the social, historical, and cultural context in which language learning and teaching takes place, and how learners and teachers negotiate and sometimes resist the diverse positions those contexts offer them. This proves that not only do individuals learn differently, but they speak differently as well, and this all includes and adds up to equal our own diversity.
To better understand the implications of discourse and identity, I'd like you all listening to try and follow this exercise with me. Picture your identity as a circle. In this circle, you may label yourself man or woman, musician or mother, outspoken or tech involved, but they are all words you feel define you to your core. Now imagine those traits were stripped from you. What would you be, and how would you evolve without the traits you have spent years building upon to create your personality? This is what it is like for a student with their own developed version of language when they are confided into an academic or professional approach. One thing we would like to know is what parts of our friends, peers, and mentors' dialogue coincides with how we perceive them. By doing this, we hope to better understand a vital part of the teaching world, conversation.
This goes farther than learning slang words to try and seem cool in your classroom, but going the extra step to understand the individual traits and needs of a student.
This is why we conducted a few interviews asking what parts of our friends' speech is individual to them.
And here's what they had to say. Okay. Are there any parts about your conversation and your identity that really sets you apart, either in the workplace or at home?
I would say yes. I like to think that I speak differently depending on the setting that I'm in. Typically, if I'm at home or around some friends, more of a slang conversation or goofing off. in a work setting, I try to keep communication as professional as possible. Refrain from some of that slang that you kind of use around friends or at a party, or maybe even around family. As far as family, try to keep things, I wouldn't say professional, but more relaxed than in a professional setting, but also not as
When you're hanging out with your friends.
and stuff.
Okay.
Yes.
So here I have two separate mock scenarios of different types of language. For one, we have a professional language seen in an email asking for a extension on a project. This could be something that you adapt in to your peers or to your bosses. That's a type of language that you will be using. And then another language that we seem to use all the time is on your phone, that more casual conversation. And we have this little conversation here where you're able to express yourself with things such as even grammar, because you're writing, but things such as emojis and exclamation marks, and you can be more expressive with that fact.
Let's think back to the conversation being had at the beginning of this video. Now, do you see parts of personalities shining throughout their dialogue? This is because dialogue and speech are a part of your personality. Without even realizing it, in casual conversation, everybody uses their own personal form of discourse. It is important to not snuff and silence these voices being heard throughout our classrooms. This is why, to protect the relationship between an identity kit and discourse, you must first understand it. Thank you for listening.